You've got some fans.
I was going to say, sorry about that noise. They really like me.
Yeah.
It's very popular.
The interchangeable Michaels.
Yeah, well, I think that's right. That's why I grew the beard for the occasion. Look, this is a particularly exciting night for me. I'm Michael Williams. I'm director of the Wheeler Centre and thrilled to see so many of you out here tonight. Our guest obviously needs very little introduction, but I'm going to give a brief one nonetheless. Having a career that makes you a celebrated icon around the world and a national treasure at home might be seen as something of an achievement. But having two careers that both make you an icon internationally and a national treasure at home is just overreaching a bit, I think.
Sorry, I apologise.
It makes the rest of us look bad.
I know.
Just calm down.
Okay.
Because, look, the truth of it is, to be completely honest, that's a modest assessment of our guest this evening's achievements. Alongside the twin poles of his career as a member of Monty Python and as England's most celebrated professional traveller, he's also carved out formidable achievements as a screenwriter, an actor, a children's author, a diarist, and a novelist. Talk about an overachievement. And all of this while maintaining a reputation for being funny, versatile, smart, charming, generous, and deeply and profoundly nice.
Oh, shut up.
Sorry.
Shut up, Michael.
Ladies and
really
gentlemen, please welcome Michael Palin.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. Thank you.
I am sorry about the nice thing. Are you utterly sick of that?
I'm very sick of it, yeah. I didn't start it. I know I'm not nice. My wife will bear that out. My children will bear that out. Everyone who's sort of ever seen me try and put a light bulb in and it breaks in my hand will hear un-Palin-like words. I just don't swear on camera very much, and I do find actually it is easier to be nice to people, which I don't think is a sort of great, difficult thing to work out. But I'm amazed the number of people who do find confrontation preferable to conciliation, but not me. I love you all.
I suspect that's
Especially
mutual.
you, Michael.
Thank you. Look, I did read an interview where you said that you'd never been to a country where it was considered rude to smile.
Yes, that's true, yeah.
And yet, despite your reputation for being nice, you're incredibly racist backstage, which surprised me.
Yes, well, I hope to... There, actually, that's gone down very well. People now see me as a fully rounded human being rather than just some sort of walking kind of...
If there's one thing Melbourne crowds love, it's racism.
Okay.
Look, we have so much ground to cover. I do want to give the audience a chance to ask some questions a bit later in the evening. And it's such an extraordinary and varied career, I wasn't sure where to start. So I thought, where better than here? Tell me about being a train spotter.
Well, it was a sort of thing you did in Sheffield in the 1950s. It was all about... My school, I don't know if it's still the same, was all about collecting things. People had collections of anything. Cheese labels were very popular. I kid you not, cheese labels. Some people collected string, the clever ones. Those, seeking a fulfilled sex life became train spotters. And there was something, I don't know, it's something exciting about trains. I think because for me they represented a sort of escape in a way, and I used to go down to Sheffield Station and see my sister off. She worked in London. She was 9 years older than me, and saw these trains coming in from Glasgow and going to London. I thought, wow, that is the wide world. I'd just been to Nottingham. That's as far as I'd been. It was only 30 miles away. So there's something glamorous about what trains represented. But also, I have to say, it was making lists of the names of the locomotives. And interestingly enough, the locomotives that came through Sheffield were of a particular class named after the British Empire. And there'll probably only be one of them now, but there were about sort of 50 then. So Barbados would come through and, Dominion of Canada and all that sort of thing. And I would dutifully write them down. So again, you've got travel there as well.
So was that, leaving aside the list making for a minute, were those early impulses to escape, was that a hint of the drama mania that would take you later in life?
Yeah, I think it probably was. When people ask me, why do you travel? Which is a difficult thing to say, but I mean, I can remember from very, very early on, the stories I liked to read were always set in foreign countries. They're always somewhere exotic. I loved the stories of great explorers. I mean, Scott and Amazon, that sort of thing. In fact, just a quick story, and then I had to do, when we got to the South Pole, at the end of Pole to Pole, I had to do a final piece to camera. It was about minus 50 degrees. And I'd summed up what I wanted to say. It was going back to Sheffield, and here I was, the point where my great hero had reached. And, I poured out all my feelings about what it meant to me. And we finished it. It was freezing cold, and the camera was about to jam. And I said, let's go. And the sound guy said, I think you ought to just listen to that. I said, well, what? And he was grinning. He was grinning at the South Pole, minus 50. And he said, just listen to it. And he was right, because by a rather odd intonation, I had said at one point, I remember as a schoolboy in Sheffield reading about the exploits of Scott and Amundsen under the bedclothes at night. And the sound man who was attuned to these sort of, how should we say, sapphic nuances. So I had to do it again. I mean, how silly is that?
I'm interested that you talk about Scott as a hero. Looking at threads through your work, one of the things that comes up quite a bit is work that's acutely aware of the tradition to which it belongs. The first travel series you did was Around the World in 80 Days, and you were very mindful of following in Phineas Fogg's footsteps. And your two novels, Hemingway's Chair and your latest novel, The Truth, which is just out now and can be bought at Avenue Bookshop after the event. Michael taught me to say that. Both of them are concerned with men who have literary idols and heroes and people whose footsteps they're following in. Who were your big heroes apart from Walter Scott when you were young?
Oh, Keith Miller, the great Australian bowler and batsman. He was just the greatest, yeah. I had sporting heroes then. And Keith Miller was a big hero who I met, quite extraordinarily. I met him at Lord's a few years before he died. And it happens sometimes. It's happened to me. You meet someone who you have so much to say. You have so much you want to sort of talk to them about, ask them about. And he had two sticks, and he looked at me and said, love your programs. And before anything had happened, he was asking me about, my travels and Monty Python. He'd loved Monty Python. I was saying, stop. I want you to tell me how you hit that six over the pavilion at Lord's and killed an old lady back in 1946. So he was a hero. Travelers generally were heroes.
Did you have acting and comedy heroes when you were growing up?
Yes. The first one was, the Slapstick. God, I can't even remember his name. He was such a hero. The little jacket. Well, hello, I can't believe I was... Anyway.
I would say Chaplin, but I'm enjoying the impression, so...
Norman Wisdom, exactly, yes, thank you. Very good. No,
someone escort that woman out.
Yeah. No, I love Norman Wisdom, and I have to say also Jerry Lewis. I loved Slapstick at that time. And I remember Norman Wisdom in a particular film where they were plotting the Allied invasion. And he was a tea boy coming in with the tea, and they were sort of had ships and boats and this great big sort of map out there. And they say, right, and you say, I brought the tea. No. So we'll put those in there. All right. So he puts the tea in, and it's pushed towards Europe and all that. Well, I thought that was funny at the time. The same with Jerry Lewis when he was sweeping leaves in the park, and that nerdy character. Then he swept up all these leaves. Then he lifts up the lawn and just goes like that and runs them underneath. So there's two. And then, of course, as I got more and more sophisticated, the Goons, Spike and Peter Sellers as a great comic actor. But they were really, that was just an inspiration. When I first heard the Goon shows, which I heard when I was about 12 years old. That was quite something.
Because the late 60s were a pretty extraordinary time for comedy in the UK. Your start on the Frost Report. Can you talk a little bit about that period?
Well, I was still at the beginning of the 60s, started at Oxford in 62, and the show that really changed things for us was Beyond the Fringe. Peter Cook, Dudley Moore, Alan Bennett, Jonathan Miller. And because here were four, and people, it's a bit like us, they were from university. They were not from the traditional comic background, and yet they were doing kind of merciless sketches about politicians, about the church, about the army, about the futility of the war, things that were just not allowed to be said on a stage in England at that time. And they were doing it so well that they were just packing the houses. They became incredibly successful. And after that, along came the kind of television version of it, which was That Was the Week That Was, with David Frost in the chair, and again, sharply, deliberately satirical, like little boys had suddenly been allowed to run around in their parents' house when they were away, and dismantling everything. And that happened sort of in the first part of the 1960s. So by the time we came along, I mean, the satire, the satirical move, the breaking down of the barriers, the milking of the sacred cows had sort of happened. And we were left with a slightly open field. Where was comedy going to go by the time we came along? There were still traditional sketch shows. The Frost Report, where I started writing with Terry Jones, was fairly traditional, with sketches and little quickie jokes and all that. But where were we going to go? And the group of us, and John Cleese and Graham Chapman were both writers in the Frost Report, Eric Idle was, and we kind of looked at each other's work and said, oh, you know, we quite like that. We were on the same wavelength. And 4 years later, that sort of led to us coming together to be Monty Python. But the groundwork, if you like, had been already done. The breaking up of a rather sort of conventional attitude to comedy had happened.
So what was the process in the writers' room as Monty Python formed? Did you spur each other on? Did you compete with each other? I mean, how was that dynamic?
Well, what we did was we wrote in the various writing groups that were already existed, which were just basically myself and Terry Jones, who'd written since university, John Cleese and Graham Chapman, Eric writing usually on his own, and Terry Gilliam, who was vitally important to Python. I mean, his animations were just so important in making it different and fresh and enabling us to sort of jump from one idea to another without having to resolve it. And we would all sort of get together and discuss some vague outlines of a show. Then we'd spend a week away, write material, bring it to the table, and John would read his stuff and I would read the stuff that Terry Jones and myself had written. And that was it. And the filter was, did people laugh or didn't they laugh? But you had to, the reading was great. It was terrific fun. The first time you brought these things to life. And it was competitive, I guess, but in a good way. And ultimately, the winner of the competition was whoever made everyone laugh. So it had to be about laughter. And that's worth remembering, because a lot of people think, oh, Python was concerned with changing the world of comedy and breaking down barriers. We just wanted to make each other laugh. And then hopefully one or two other people.
One or two.
Yeah, well, I mean, we didn't know at the time. We were our show was put out very late at night. The BBC were not particularly happy with it. They didn't know what we were doing, and they put us on in what they call the graveyard slot, late on a Saturday, where most series had disappeared.
What do you think the particular sensibilities you brought to the table were? What were the things, looking back at Python's work, that you think were idiosyncratically yours?
Oh, well, that's kind of hard to say, because it was such a group thing. But I suppose I had with Terry a kind of sense of the surreal. I mean, I suppose you could say the Spanish Inquisition was something that I would have thought up, I don't know why, whereas John and Graham would have thought about something rather more sort of logical, like the Dead Parrot sketch or something like that. If you can see, it's logical, but there is a sort of, that is a traditional sketch. And but the Spanish Inquisition was just a very silly idea. And I liked that stream of consciousness, the way of getting into a sketch from another one. And the same with the Lumberjack song. The Lumberjack song was only a way of resolving a sketch that we'd written about a barber who can't stand the sight of blood, you know, and he's cutting somebody's hair. And he's obviously psychotic. Oh, blood, 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 down, blood, kill, kill, murder, murder, murder. Yeah. Oh, how's the football gone today? Oh, very well, sir, very well. You know, he's just trying to sort of keep the man calm as he cuts his hair. And we wrote this, and it just wasn't getting anywhere. I thought, well, how do we get out of this? Well, ring Terry Gilliam or something like that. But then I just said, oh, maybe just let him say he didn't want to be a barber. Or maybe he wants to be something else. A lumberjack just came into my mind. And so I think I was sort of had a fairly open mind to any idea that was sort of, illogical, but imaginative at the same time.
Looking back over many of those flying circus episodes, there's a kind of recurring dynamic between you and John Cleese, with him often apoplectic and you painfully cheerful and in the face of his mounting rage. Was that fun to play? Did you ever want to turn the tables?
It was very fun, great fun to play, because basically John is great when he's annoyed. And that's why Basil Fawlty is such a wonderful, wonderful character, because it's barely suppressed rage throughout. I mean, it's a brilliant, brilliant creation. I don't know how he did it without bursting a blood vessel and having a heart attack each show. But that was the relationship. He would come into the shop and ask something ordinary. I brought this parrot, you know, it's dead. No, it's not. It's resting. No, it's not resting. I'll wake it up then. No, hello, Polly, and you go through all that. But he always played this very serious, and I would pat it back to him. The same with another of my favourite sketches we did together was The Cheese Shop, in which there is no cheese. And, all those things. We got this? No. Wensleydale, yes? I'll have some Wensleydale, please. Oh, sorry, I thought you were talking to me. Mr. Wensleydale, that's my name. So just wonderful stuff. And even down to my favourite item of Python, which is the fish slapping dance, you know, where I hit John Cleese lightly on the face with fish. I knew I was annoying him slightly as I did it. And that sort of, there was an extra sort of edge which made those sketches work. But they were, I don't think I was able to do, I've never been able to do Cheese Shop without breaking up at some point. It just is impossible. Especially at the end, when it goes on for about sort of 4.5 minutes, and these city gents playing balalaikas, and it's about 4 minutes of sketch before John says, "Shut that bloody noise up!" And it's just, that gets me every time, because he can do anger and invective so well.
I suspect,
in life as well as on
I suspect,
stage.
and it's murky in here. Show of hands, how many of you think you could recite a certain amount of at least some of the sketches Michael's mentioned in the past few minutes? It is extraordinary.
We have our lawyers, you know.
Yeah, you're not allowed, just to be clear. It is extraordinary the way they've survived, though. I mean, comedy can date terribly quickly, and yet you managed to produce something that defined a generation of British comedy and is a touchstone for comedians since. Do you have a sense of why that was? What it is that made it last?
I don't know. I mean, I think partly because Python did not begin as something planned by executives who'd done research into what was going to be funny at the time and come up with a plan. It was just spontaneous. A lot of it was playing on sort of repetition. Our first audience, our early audience was largely, you know, people at school or college who were kind of learning things at the time. So the idea of repeating stuff kind of caught on. It might have been something to do with that. I also think that, a lot of the, the impetus behind some of the sketches is still, you can still see it around now. I mean, the cheese shop, the idea of someone being completely hopeless when you're going in for something you want, still happens, you know, or the gas cooker sketch, you know, where they've got people with all these forms to fill in, and in the end there's about 40 people stretching down the street who come to service the gas cooker. I mean, that still happens with telephone companies and God knows what, you know. So I think people can see a slight relevance to their own lives. The Spanish Inquisition, for God's sake, you know. No, that's not a good way to go, is it?
Has your sense of humour changed?
Well, I don't think so. I have to say I still find Python very funny. I still like watching some of those sketches. I can see there's bad stuff there as well. But if you ask me whether I still enjoy them, or whether I've grown out of that humour, I'd say no. I've grown out of Norman Wisdom slightly, but no, I think I still find things like that funny. Yeah.
What's the effect? What's the effect on the psyche? No, not that. That's too big a question. Well, what is the effect of having such colossal success early in your career? I mean, did you find it hard to move on from Python when you all went your separate ways?
Do you know, we never really were aware that Python was that successful. The first series went on, and the BBC, just by the skin of their teeth, renewed us for the second series. We never got big ratings. At that time, television shows were made for maybe a life of about a year. Maybe if you were lucky, you got a repeat, and that was it. So there weren't DVDs. There was no other way of of accessing the material other than watching it when the BBC chose to put it out. So nowadays, something can start and it can become amazingly successful, and all the media pick it up, and network media and all that. Suddenly it's the big thing and it's everywhere. And that just never happened with Python. And the first time, honestly, that I was aware that Python was something much bigger and more influential than we thought was when it broke in America. And that was 1973, I think, or 74 even. I mean, it's about 4 years after we'd done the television shows. We had, as far as television is concerned, we'd split up. We were making movies, or we were just about to make a movie. And a guy from Public Broadcasting Service in Dallas, Texas, picked up a copy of Python, liked it, rang the BBC in New York and said, "Have you any more of these?" And they said, "Oh, well, yeah, we have, yes. We've got 45 of them. Do you really want them?" He said, "Yeah, I'd love to see them." Sent them to Dallas. He played them over a weekend and got this extraordinary response, mainly from college kids. And suddenly we heard that it spread around America, around the various affiliates of the public broadcasting system, from Dallas up to New York and then up to Boston. And suddenly we were getting screaming kids sort of demanding more of Python, and we got fan mail and all that. And suddenly you thought, hey, this is America. We've got a huge audience. We're a big hit. It was like being a sort of minor Beatles for a short while. But, I mean, that's a long way round of answering your question. Honestly, we didn't have to deal with the prospect of fame at that time. It was a prospect of work. And also, what do we do after Monty Python? John's left to go on and do something else. How do we make money? You know, I had a family and all that sort of thing. Stardom didn't really come into it at all.
But by the late 70s, early 80s, you were live at the Hollywood Bowl. You hosted Saturday Night Live 4 times, including once with your mother. How did that come about?
It was fantastic. Well, I'd hosted Saturday Night Live, and I knew Lorne Michaels, who was then producing it. And for my mother's 80th birthday, 1984, I thought I'd take her to New York, and my sister and I took her there. And she'd never flown, never been further than, I think, Paris or somewhere like that. And I flew her over to New York on Concorde. And I thought this would just be the most amazing thing, would blow her mind, But she'd never been on a plane before. She thought Concorde was the ordinary way you got to New York. I said, look, 3 hours, 12 minutes, and we're in New York. How about that? Yes, where do we go now, she says. Anyway, they heard on Saturday Night Live that my mother was in town, and I was going to host it that time, and they said, would your mother be interested in sort of just coming on the show? She sounds great. And so I did the opening monologue with my mother sitting in a chair knitting and occasionally tugging at my jacket to tell me to sort of make sure that my collar was right and all that sort of thing. And she was absolutely brilliant. 80-year-old woman. She was in Eddie Murphy's dressing room. Eddie Murphy wasn't on that week. And I said, Mum, you're in Eddie Murphy's dressing room. What? Who's he? What is he? Is he a wrestler? No, he's not a wrestler. No, he's kind of... And she did it. And she was so good in the opening bit that they asked her, actually, as it obviously is, it's a live show, would she introduce some of the other acts? So there's my little mum introducing this wild rock band, sort of crazed, drug-crazed figures. And she'd do her little, now that. It was just fantastic. And then I took her to the party afterwards. They always have a party. And I thought perhaps she'd want to go back to the hotel. She said, oh, no, I'm quite happy. And she sat at this party, and it was lovely. And everyone came up and talked to her. I had to drag her away at about 4 o'clock from some low dive in Manhattan. So, yes, thank you for remembering that. It was a lovely memory of her.
Was she a fan of Python?
Yes. She had to be. I was her son, I remember when Life of Brian came out. My mother was a churchgoer. I would say more of a social churchgoer. She wasn't a devout follower. And, of course, people were absolutely shocked in the place where she lived outside London. Total scandal, Michael's doing impressions of Jesus, all these misconceptions. Oh, God, that's the wrong way of putting it, but you know what I mean. Immaculate misconceptions going around. And she would defend me staunchly. And, her little friends say, well, Michael's rather overstepped. No, he hasn't. It's a very funny film. Very, very good. It's not about Jesus. It's about, the church and administration and all this sort of... She was terrific, yeah.
Was your father a fan?
Well, my father was... no, he couldn't really... My poor old dad. He could never quite understand what I found funny or I mean, it was a great time when I was first listening to the Goons on the one radio we had in the house, and I hoped my father would just let me listen to it without coming in. And of course, he came in just at the moment when they were doing one of those. He says, "There's something wrong with the set, old boy." Then later, when I was listening to Elvis Presley, first time I really found some pop music was. I discovered myself and Elvis doing it. Since my baby left me upon a new. There's something wrong with the set, old boy. So by the time it came to Python, it was very much something wrong with the set. And sadly, my dear dad, he is quite ill towards the end of his life, and he had Parkinson's disease, and they gave him various treatments, L-Dopa and all that. And the manifestations of this treatment were quite odd. You hallucinate when they got the dose wrong and all that. And Graham Chapman, who was a doctor, was fascinated by my father's hallucinations. Especially, he said, what form do they take? And I said, well, he sees hamsters running along the carpet and going up his trouser leg. And Graham thought this, really? He thought this was very Pythonic. I said, yes. So what happens? So my mother has to get out a bag and pull them out of his trousers and put them in this bag. And I thought, dear old dad,
I can see that
very,
there's
very
episodes of
Pythonic.
Flying Circus that would not have gone down well then.
No, he couldn't see that there was anything particularly funny in it, but I think he liked the fact that it was successful.
Yeah. So that period after you'd kind of made it big in America and the films started happening, was that... tell me a bit about the difference between making the films, Holy Grail and Life of Brian, and the TV show.
Main thing about the films and the reason why we decided to do them was really that we were control freaks in a way. We felt that not only could we write the best stuff, we could also perform the best stuff. And we had two film directors, potential film directors, amongst our band, Terry Jones and Terry Gilliam. So we thought, well, the way on from a television show is to try and direct our own movies and write our own movies, and let's have a go. And that was the thinking behind Monty Python and the Holy Grail. And the difficulty in writing was that you had to deal with a 90-minute format, at least 90 minutes, and whereas television was just half an hour, how do you hold an audience's attention, even if it's just comedy sketches, for 90 minutes? It's a long time. So we had to find a device which would sort of appear to be a story whilst being able to accommodate all sorts of experiments and different ideas and different characters. So we came up with the Knights of the Round Table because we all play the knights, and it was a sort of rather amorphous story which goes anywhere, and we could get the Grail or not get the Grail in the end. And that was why we settled on that. And, then within that format could play around with it a bit. But we were quite... what was quite important was that we should make a good-looking film as well. This was quite something that shouldn't just be funny, it should look good. And we chose to shoot it in Scotland. And we had a bit of a setback because the National Trust for Scotland would not let us use any of their castles because they had read the script and said it wasn't compatible with the dignity of the fabric of the buildings. You know, these are buildings that had boiling tar going down the walls, you know, people impaled against them years ago. No jokes. So there was a private castle called Doune Castle, and they were very nice, and they accommodated us there. And I have to say they've reaped the benefit, because they get hordes of Japanese tourists now who don't go to any of the other historic castles. They go to Doune because they want to take photographs of the battlements from which the cow came flying over. And the very enterprising little bookshop, as well as selling, the history of the castle, sells coconuts, which they can, halves of coconuts which they can take away. So they've done well, but actually, considering the film was made for a total of £209,000, it does look beautiful, and that was very important to us. We wanted to make sure that it wasn't just comedy, but it had a beautiful sort of feel to it and was directed well.
As your relationship as a group was changing and you're working out your career trajectory, what were your ambitions for yourself at this point? I mean, had you discovered you wanted to be an actor? Had you discovered you'd rather be writing? Where did your passions lie at that point?
Oh, that's a really good question. Didn't think about it that way. I was just assumed I'd always be acting in some shape or form. But I kind of saw that my acting was going to be really... It was going to be within the Python group. I mean, it was wonderful. Material was great. You could play 10 or 12 different characters in a movie. I remember thinking at the time, I'm going to be very spoiled. When this all comes to an end, what do I do? Play, Shakespeare on the stage? And so it's kind of made me feel a bit wobbly about a future career as an actor. I thought I wanted to write, and I had... I was writing with Terry at the time, and I think we wanted to write slightly more serious stuff, possibly, television play. It ended up ripping yarns, which wasn't serious at all. But I wasn't really focusing on anything. I wanted to write and act in about equal balance. And I think, as I've always felt, that with writing you have slightly more control, because you do the first draft, whereas an actor, you read what someone else has done. So I've always felt that writing was very important, and I think probably at the time I thought this was the key thing that I had to sort of learn and build on.
Because your immediate post-Python career, I mean, you had some terrific acting roles. I mean, Alan Bleasdale's television program GBH, where you were almost an entirely dramatic role.
Yeah.
And, I mean, not to just sit here and flatter you, but you were fantastic in that. I mean, it was terrific. Did you enjoy doing that kind of serious dramatic acting?
I've never had enough confidence to really just go and do it like that. And I do admire some people who seem to be able to do that, although most actors I know actually are terrified before they come on stage, But it was a big challenge, that. It was a 10-part series, and I liked Alan Bleasdale's work, and it was all about politics in Liverpool, the end of an era of disillusion with left-wing politics in Liverpool, and corruption in the council and all that. And I was the school teacher who sort of stood up to the union thugs and all that sort of thing. But it was more complex than that, and it was a great part to do, really get your teeth into, and I don't think there was a day when I felt, I can do this, standing on my head. Each day I had to sort of think, this is really tough, I've got to get this right. I don't want to let anybody down. But I enjoyed doing it, and again, I was acting with Robert Lindsay, who was really good. It's like acting. I was lucky to act with Maggie Smith in a couple of films, and that's just heaven, because they bring something out of you that you never thought you could do. You've got to really sort of raise your act. And it turned out to be a powerful piece of work. But I'm never quite sure about acting, why it works, why it doesn't work. I mean, I know I can act because I've acted since school, you know.
And you won a BAFTA for your role as Ken Pyle in A Fish Called Wanda?
Yes, that's right, yeah.
I was interested to read in your diary that when you first read the script for Wanda, you weren't a fan, particularly.
No, I mean, John had approached me and said he got this idea for a heist movie in which one of the characters had a stammer. He knew that my dad had quite a bad stammer, so we asked him, you know, how does it happen? What does it mean? What's the background to it? And we sort of put together a character called Ken. John went away, wrote the script. When I first read it, I thought it was very hard, very nasty. And I thought, this is going to be too cruel to be funny. But what John did, which was very skillful, was to cast it brilliantly and to get Kevin Kline to play the psychotic, crazed idiot killer. So John could go off and play a rather nice little comedy Cary Grant role. And all the stuff that on the page looked very, very vicious, Kevin, you know, shooting things and me killing dogs and all that, suddenly came to life when you got the various characters playing off each other. And so, you know, in the end it worked extremely well. And Kevin handled the black humour so superbly that it was, you know, it all fitted in.
In a career with pretty stiff competition, was that your least favourite wig that you ever had to wear?
Oh, God, yes. Wig. It wasn't a wig.
Oh, a perm.
Yeah, it was a perm.
Oh, magnificent.
Yeah. No, I went and had a perm, and my wife wouldn't let me get into bed, you know. Said, you can sleep elsewhere. I'm not sleeping with this man. And there are various things I had to do during that period which were not to do with the film, like sort of giving a speech here or there. And occasionally the photos come up of me with this silly curly hair. And I thought, God. But it was just easier. It was either that or turn up at sort of 4 o'clock every morning and spend 3 hours, a bit like Elephant Man, having your makeup put on. So I had it permed, and that was that.
I don't think you should rule out going back to that look at some point. I think it's very striking.
The other thing was that Ken's outfit, we wanted Ken to be one of these people with absolutely no dress sense at all. And we went to this shop in North London with our costume designer, who's Hazel, who worked on all the Python things. And she wanted to get a pair of really ill-fitting trousers. And went to this shop, and the man was very helpful, and we kept getting these trousers, and they looked really good. And Hazel said, no, that doesn't work. And he was very, very confused. Eventually, got these tiny little ones which ended about here and were terribly tight around the crotch. And she said, yes, that's lovely. And the man said, but they don't fit. She said, doesn't matter. That's great. We'll have 3 pairs.
So around the time Wanda came out, you got the offer from the BBC to do Around the World in 80 Days. You write in your diary, I must say, it's very useful when researching an interview with someone for them to have published all their diaries over a kind of 40-year period.
Yeah, at some length, I'm
That's
afraid,
quite handy. Thank you for that.
Thank you. I did it for you, Michael, because
Well,
I knew this
I've
day
used
would
it.
come.
This interview could have been entirely me quoting you back at yourself, which I think would have gone well. But around that time, you wrote in your diary on the eve of leaving on Around the World in 80 Days, to bed about 2 o'clock and to sleep an hour or so before dawn. There's no turning back now. Did you have at all a sense then of embarking on a new part of your career?
No, I really didn't see it as a new part of my career. I saw it as a big challenge that I probably, maybe, should not have said yes to. I'd said yes to it because it involved going around the world. I thought, this is great. I love traveling. I kind of expected there to be a script. There was no script. And we were just going to set off for 80 days of the BBC's money with a cameraman following me all the way around. That's why I was sort of panicking at the last minute. And I thought, well, it is like jumping off a cliff. We'll just see where we land. There was no formula, there was no precedent for it. And I did see it as just one thing I had to get through without fucking it up, basically.
They're not going to think you're nice anymore now. You just said fuck.
Sorry. I don't fucking care.
Was it all so difficult that you didn't have a moment to think, Eureka, this is what the teenage boy inside me always wanted to do? Or did you have a moment on the trip where you just thought, this is it, I'm a traveller, I am Walter Scott?
Yeah, it did. There was quite a significant moment, because it started off with me thinking that I should perhaps be playing a character. It shouldn't be me, I should be Phileas Fogg in the book. So I'm playing this sort of silly Englishman abroad, not very convincingly. And then, we did fairly conventional things. It started on the Orient Express, we went to Venice and all that sort of stuff. The third episode, all our plans have fallen apart, and we were supposed to get across the Indian Ocean to Bombay in a dhow from a place called Oman. And because the boat we were supposed to take to Oman didn't turn up, total change of plans. We just had to get to somewhere where we could get a dhow. So I drove right across the Saudi Peninsula with the director, unable to film anything because we weren't allowed to by the authorities, and found a dhow in Dubai, crewed by 18 Gujarati fishermen, none of whom spoke English, and off we set. And we depended on these people for the success of our project. And, with all our technology, there was nothing we could do. They were chugging along at about 4 knots an hour with an engine that was powered by a large rubber band. And it was just, we had 7 nights, 8 days with these guys. And I've never been in that situation before, where you very slowly, a kind of friendship develops, and you forget everything about why you're doing this and who you are and playing a character. I remember one night I got quite ill, so the next morning, instead of just pretending it was all going well, I did a piece to camera saying, I feel rotten, I feel lousy, I want to go home, I don't know why I'm doing this, moan, moan, moan. And people loved that. They said, oh, you were really ill on that episode. And by the time I got off that down, I realized that this was not only something very unusual and totally different for me had happened, which is I'd been with a group of people with whom apparently I shared nothing, not a language, not a culture, not a religion, and yet we'd become pretty close friends in a way over that time. And I felt that's an extraordinary thing. So it wasn't so much what we'd seen. I mean, what we'd seen was just the Indian Ocean bobbing around, but it was actually this interplay with the people and the feeling that all the fear of not being able to speak a language didn't really matter. If you're in a certain situation, you kind of understood each other. And we devised a way of talking to each other which was quite fluent in a way. And that was a magical thing. And it was after that particular episode I gave up playing Phileas Fogg, and I thought, well, whatever's thrown at me, I'll just be me and be natural.
Was that hard for you? Your career up until then had been playing parts and characters.
Yeah,
it had been
exactly.
Comic voices and wigs and perms.
Yeah.
Was it confronting to be suddenly laying yourself bare to your audience?
No, I actually suddenly felt immensely relieved. The thing was, I didn't really know until the series had gone out how it would be received. But I realized that, as I say, not having to play a part enabled me to just react to things with my own voice, my own feelings. So I wasn't sort of having to disguise anything. And then when it went out and we got very, very good audiences and the book sold very well, I realized that actually this was an advantage. The fact that I couldn't speak the language, the fact people saw me trying to buy a ticket at a railway station in Egypt and not being able to speak the language, in a snake restaurant in China, trying to make sense of the fact they're killing a snake by the table and all that. This was... what went wrong was as much a part of the appeal of the program as seeing beautiful parts of the world. Meeting people was as much a part of the program as seeing, mountains and temples and all that sort of thing. So I felt extremely relieved, not only that it had worked, but also thinking, well, maybe, just maybe, there's another journey around the world one could do in some shape or form with the crew I'd been with me being myself. And that led to sort of pole to pole.
I'm interested you mentioned the crew, because it seems like it's another, collaborative, creative project. I mean, it was quite a small group, and you've more or less stuck together for the next quarter century.
Well, certainly my cameraman, Nigel Meakin, we've been together on all the journeys, and it's really, really useful. We now have a relationship where we don't have to say, stand here, stand there. I kind of know where he is with the camera. I know when he wants to get me out of the way. It's something that you just learn over the years. It wasn't always easy. I remember there was one sequence we were filming in a village in China, and we started filming. They said, well, you're going to see the old man of the village with the Chinese translator, and they're sitting in this hut there, and we want you just to walk across through the village and into the hut and sit down and talk. And I was just so amazed by this village and the beauty of it. It was just so extraordinary. And I'd quite forgotten that Nigel was there, sort of filming away. I was looking into things, going, this is a wonderful place here. What a marvelous, look at that roof. That's just incredible. And then where does that little alley lead and all that? And I just heard Nigel through gritted teeth saying, get in the fucking hut. So that we learnt together how to, I was aware of the weight he was carrying. And
So over 25 years you've been doing these travel shows now. I mean, it is more significant a part of your career than Python was.
Yeah.
Has it diminished your love of travel at all?
No, not at all. No, not at all. I mean, quite the opposite.
Do you travel with your family at all?
Well, yeah, I do. I mean, we go on family holidays. I don't travel like I would with the crew. We don't go on quite such adventurous journeys because my wife, thank goodness, is not she's not a rival for adventure travel. She likes to go somewhere and sit down and be reasonably comfortable and walk around the square and do a bit of shopping and go home. But
not much of a documentary series in there.
No, great. No, absolutely. And she doesn't follow me with a camera everywhere. So we go to New York, or we go to some cities in Europe or something like that. And I'm hoping my grandsons, my two grandsons, I'm going to try and inveigle them into one day coming around the world with me. I thought Travels with Archie would be a great series. He's only 6, unfortunately, and he'd get very bored. Grandpa, where are we? I'm hungry.
There's easily 10 parts of that, I think, people would watch.
Exactly, yeah.
So your most recent series is Brazil, which screens here on the ABC, begins this Sunday night. I couldn't help but note that your last series you said was probably going to be the last time you did one of these. What was it that pulled you out of retirement when it came to the professional traveller game?
Oh, God, I'm such a liar. I said that after 80 days, that would be the last thing I'm doing. And then I did pole to pole, all right, but that is the last thing I'm doing. And then full circle around the Pacific, all right, that's the last thing. It's easier to say it's the last thing, because I always think that, and I never know how it's going to be received. And the most important thing about all these things is that they're entertaining. You don't make them just for your own sort of private viewing. It's up to the audience out there, how they respond, how they like it, whether they buy the book. And if the response is good, you're kind of lured to do some more. And the process, I still quite enjoy it. I don't know whether we're all too old now. I mean, my cameraman Nigel, he's 65, I think, and still struggling with this thing on his shoulder admirably. Whether we'd actually do any more of the sort of long journeys that we've done before. But going to specific places and observing them, I think that might be the way. I did a magazine article in Calcutta. I always wanted to go to Calcutta, and I found that such a fascinating city, absolutely so much to do. And I found myself walking around it, making notes for the article, and thinking, where's Nigel? You know, look what's happening here, the gaps and all that sort of stuff. So maybe we could just go and do sort of, you know, a month in a city or something like that. I did have an idea about doing a series called Work, which would be, you take 5 different big industrial enterprises somewhere in the world and just film them and the people who work there and what they're producing. And no, a good idea? No, I thought it was Work.
Oh no, I think it's a winner.
Would it
I was
work?
just, I'm going to go away and do it myself now. Because I suspect you'll be busy.
I'm not planning on moving for a while.
No. Because of course now, I have to be mindful of the time. In about 2 minutes, I'm going to throw it to the floor for questions. There'll be a couple of ushers in the aisles, both on the ground floor and upstairs. So if you make your way to behind the usher with the microphone, you'll get a chance to ask a question. But before we get to that, I did find, I was interested to note in your diary, in June 1988, your diary records an idea for a novel. And it is the idea for Hemingway's Chair, which it took 7 years for you to write. Have you always harboured a desire to be a novelist? Is that something that is a particular passion?
Yeah, I think so. I think if you're interested in writing and reading, as I am, you kind of want to practice it as much as possible. And I do enjoy being caught up in a novel. I love the idea of being, you know, in someone's world. And I've got a very vivid imagination, all sorts of things, you know, places I'd like to put characters and all that. So it seemed natural at some point to have a go at writing a novel. But then I was also aware of the kind of joke potential of Michael Palin, traveller, novelist. He's writing an opera. He's just designed some new fabrics for Covent Garden. He's also designed the British Olympic pool, and he's also a downhill skier. You know, come on, that was very Python. So I was slightly embarrassed about writing a novel, but I had a go at Hemingway, and it was quite successful. But I learnt a lot from it that I felt I could do better next time round. But then, you know, travel intervened, and it's been a long time before I got to the next one.
The new novel, The Truth, the protagonist of that, Keith Mabbitt, is a man who wants to be a novelist. He keeps getting dragged off onto other projects and other things. But he keeps going back to his study and wanting to sit down, and the novel is the thing that he really cares about.
Yeah. Well, he wants to write a trilogy. I thought that was rather nice. You start off. I think I'll start with the trilogy.
Nothing fills a publisher with more dread than that.
Exactly.
This is the first work in a projected trilogy. It's a terrible thing. But I was interested. The Truth incorporates some of your travel and incorporates some of. It's as if those kind of 2 strands of your interests and your work come together. And I was wondering if you could just briefly talk about the Neamgiri Hills. And the community that you met there and how it had bearing on the book.
Well, the story of the book involves this journalist who's trying to find somebody who embodies genuine virtues of truth and honesty. And I decided that the character he should follow would be an environmentalist, because environmentalists are generally considered as near to saints as we have these days. And then I thought, well, it's got to be, where would this rogue environmentalist running around the world, maverick figure, what kind of story would he be following? And I read about a situation in India, eastern India, where a big aluminium company had built a plant, and they wanted to extract bauxite from the neighboring hills. And the hills were sacred to one of the indigenous tribes of India, been there about 2,000 or 3,000 years. And they were their sacred hills, and they were fighting against this, and they were onto probably a losing battle, because once, you know, the juggernaut of big industry rolls, everyone gets kicked out. And I thought, well, this is interesting, and it was an environmental issue. So I actually went to see what was happening there in order to get a general feeling of what I might write about. And in the end, it was so fascinating that I took it as specific and just change the names. And basically, in the Niyamgiri Hills in Orissa in eastern India, there is this vast plant in the middle of nowhere, and it's heavily patrolled. And nearby are these communities of 3 or 4 tribes, called main ones called the Donglia Kond, and they were the ones who were going to be cleared out. And I was very fortunate to have a guide who took me to the village right below the sacred hills. They have several villages. And it's very unusual for them to let an outsider come there because everybody, to be honest, any white man is considered to be going on the way to the plant and is considered to be an enemy. So I was lucky to go there. And I found this village which was very, simple. People were, the men were out sort of in the woods and all that. People were sort of sitting around. Nothing much was happening, but, that's their way of life. They lived under these very, very long thatched huts coming right down to the ground, had beautiful necklaces, jewelry, all that sort of thing. And I was quite moved being there, knowing what was happening up on the hill. But what really, really sort of made the most intense impression for me was that we were standing there and I saw an older woman disappearing down the track towards the forest. And behind her was this boy, same age as Archie was about that time, must have been about 4 or 5 years old, just skipping along behind her. And I asked what was happening. He said, well, she's going to get some wood in the forest, and that's her grandson, and she's taking him along. And I thought, here's this complete love of innocence. He's in the middle of this village, he's protected, he's secure. He's so happy just to be going off to do what I would like to do with my own grandson, something like that. And yet, when permission is given to extract that bauxite, the hill behind him will be crushed. 30 feet of the top of that hill will be removed. There'll be giant bulldozers, there'll be trucks. He and his family will be taken away from there, and they'll put in little cabins somewhere else. And I just thought, that's not right. You can't do this. And so I thought, well, rather than fabricate a story, I would use a lot of the background of what I saw there.
That story and more comes across beautifully in the novel, which is an extraordinary, terrific read. There was an article about you in The Independent on Sunday in the UK that was talking about the kind of travel writer you are, and it referred to gentle curiosity, unfeigned empathy, and a rare combination of diffidence and courage. And I thought that was probably more effective a descriptor than nice.
Yes, I love that. Yeah.
It's a better way to go.
Anything that is nice-free. Yeah.
So much the better. Well, now is your chance to ask questions of Michael. The house lights are going to come up a bit and you will see where the microphones are in the aisles. Now, obviously, we would be thrilled beyond belief if you just recited quotes of your favourite comedy,
Yes.
in slabs of 10 minutes each, and that would be great. But here's an idea. Let's not do that. Michael may have a reputation for being nice, I do not. So if you could keep it brief so that as many people as possible get a turn, we would be in your debt. Just over here.
Hi, Michael. Thanks, first of all, for a fabulous talk. John Cleese, quite famously, when he was on Desert Island Discs, said that you would be his sort of luxury item, even if you were stuffed. So could I pose a 2-point question? First of all, if you were to be the one who was stuffed, what sort of position do you think John Cleese would have you in? And second, if you were to have a sort of revenge option of having John Cleese stuffed, what position would you have him in?
I bet you're tired of getting that exact question.
That is that is very personal. John has a slight obsession with me, I have to say. He's always talking about me. And he claims that I was a luxury item because he wouldn't need a radio because I talk all the time. So he'd probably want me stuffed in mid conversation. If John was stuffed, I think I'd probably like him to be stuffed in that marvelous moment in the fish slapping dance where he picks up the fish from behind his back, and instead of just hitting me with it, which would have been the obvious thing to do, sort of takes aim rather skillfully. Little moment of military precision, which I thought absolutely quintessentially defines John's humour. A little attention to detail. So I'd have him stuffed holding a fish for quite some time. Well, that's popular, isn't it?
Question
Maybe
asked
we could
and answered.
sell these in the craft store here in Melbourne.
They're all going to be questions about stuffing, I have to warn you, so get ready for that.
There's a big stuffing,
Big stuffing crowd.
building interest here.
Up there on the balcony.
Thanks for coming to Melbourne, Michael. I hope you're enjoying Australia. My question is, through all your travels, and you said the importance of meeting people is important as seeing the mountains and the monuments. What have you learnt about humanity by meeting all these different people? What commonalities bond us together? Like, what have you seen?
Can you hear that? I can't hear.
It's a little echoey from
I
up
can't
there,
hear
but it
a
was a
word.
question about, off the back of your travel, what have you learned about humanity that you didn't know
yeah.
before you saw these parts of the world? Is that doing you justice, sir?
Okay, sorry about that.
He said nice things at the start.
Yeah,
as well,
no, it's just, well, I'm sort of quite optimistic in a sense, because I don't know, I find as I travel the world, rather going back to that moment I talked about on the Tao, that it is the people who you think are most different from you in their sort of general estate, condition, amount of money, whatever, who actually are the closest to you. And it's the easiest to make a connection with, because there's a straightforwardness and there's a desire to welcome you, to be hospitable. As soon as people have a lot of money or a lot of wealth, in comes sort of the desire to protect it and the suspicion that someone's going to get it. The less you have, the less suspicious you are, the more open you are. And I think it's something worth remembering, really. We all think we've got to have so much and so many things to kind of define what we are. And actually, the happiest people I've ever met are people in sort of agricultural communities who help each other anyway, because that's how they live and that's how they survive. And so I found that kind of encouraging, because I think we tend to think that there's two sorts of people, there's them and us. And there really isn't a them, they are us, if I may say that. Just getting down to their level and not being sort of, I don't know, not being patronizing to the rest of the world, not feeling that because we have more wealth, we have more possessions, that makes us better people. Understand what it's like to have less, and you will find the most inventive people in the world. And also the people who support each other most of all. And I always think that's an encouraging sign for the future.
Hi, Michael. It's Farrell Britt, come all the way to Melbourne. Hi. In your talk, you speak about the things that you've done, varied, and the inspirations that you've had. I was wondering if you have any people in your past who you've sort of seen what they've done and gone, I wish I'd thought of that.
Yes, see what I've done, I wish I thought of that. Probably, I'm just trying to think really. Well, Johnny Cash, Bruce Springsteen, you know, I wish I'd thought of that. I mean, I do, in my own sort of area, I suppose I'm always aware of the success and indeed what David Attenborough personifies, because I feel that he is the perfect teacher, and that he has not changed the way he does what he does for 50 years. And very often when I've been sort of thinking about a series and how you do it and whether you change it and get a gimmick here and there, I look at David and I say he just defines what he's doing, he knows what he's doing, he has the information, he puts it across, and that's it. There's no bullshit apart from that. And I always sort of envy that, and I often think, gosh, I wish I knew more. You know, I can go around the world. I wish I knew what that tree was called, or what, you know, why the rocks in that particular area sort of produce this kind of natural habitat for this kind of strange creature and all that. You know, I think I've missed out somewhere along the line in understanding the world the way he does, and I admire so much the way he puts it across. And Norman Wisdom.
That's up here.
Yeah. Regards to your travel experiences, is there one in particular, sorry, mad echo, that in hindsight is a brilliant story, but the reality of the situation you think, oh my God, never again?
Again, I'm sorry.
It's about career regrets, I think.
Okay.
If that's not too reductive, about things that you've approached where you can still see on paper why you did them and you thought they were a good idea, trips or stories, whereas in hindsight you think, oh God, never again.
Gosh, that's a hard question. I mean, I don't think I've gone up any totally blind alley. I think there are things that I could have done much better. You know, yes, there are things I've done much better. That's all I can say. I can't give you any great detail because it's quite...
You did say in one interview that you can see the weakness in everything you've ever done, sometimes to an almost alarming degree.
Yeah.
Are you a harsh marker of your own work?
Yeah. I always think... Well, things are never perfect. That's a given. But I'm always looking at my work and thinking, if only we'd done it this way or that way. Generally speaking, you can be 90% happy with something you've done. And I've done that with many things. But it's that extra 10% that you see when you've done it. Oh, if only. But I'm sure everyone does that in a way. I hope so, you know. Maybe Wordsworth was the same, you know. Daffodils, daffodils. Oh, God, I wish I'd done donuts. It would be so much more interesting. So perhaps everyone does that. I'm sorry I can't be more helpful and give you a definite, sort of clear answer on that. But
I think daffodils to donuts is pretty clear. Down here.
The 13 years old Japanese girl saw Monty Python for the first time, and she was struck with a sense of humor and a different kind of comedy. And she decided to be Monty Python when she was little, but her dream never came true, and she didn't know the avenue, how she can be the Monty Python. But interesting fate brought her 15 years later to show Michael Palin Tokyo. And she was very happy, but still she had to live her own life and feed a baby, get married, travel around the world. And I couldn't say thank you to Mr. Michael Palin. After another 15 years later, she finally had opportunity in Melbourne to decide to go into the comedy. What would you say to this girl? Any comment and the advice? And if she have the latest fan letter, would you like to receive it from her?
Well, you know, she sounds though she's the sort of person who succeeds at whatever she does. And good luck. I mean, the great thing about going into comedy is you've got to make people laugh. So pretty quickly you'll find out whether you're any good at it or not. So I mean, you know, good luck. I found when I did comedy, it was always very important to have somebody with me there, helping create the stuff, and also acting together sometimes as well. But I found that's a very, very important thing. But yeah, well, fantastic.
Sorry. I wanted to say very outstanding thank you, Michael Palin. My name is Mayumi Nobetsu, and I'm very lucky to see you again after 15 years of the full circle. And I hope I can give you the fan letter.
Thank you.
Michael, if you could keep any possible answers brief, because the questions are going to go on a bit. Just to be clear, we're not here for you. One over here would be great. Thank you.
Hi, Michael. Firstly, thank you for such an incredible body of work. My question actually relates to Python. My favourite Python work was Life of Brian, and I wondered if you could take us into how that project developed, because it was such a controversial piece of work at the time.
Yes. Well, originally, we did Holy Grail, and then that gradually, quietly, that did well. Where are you? Oh, there you are, yes. You started there, you're now there. Yeah, and that did well. No, that did well. And so there was a thought, well, maybe we could do another film, and I think it was Eric who first came up with the title Jesus Christ, Lust for Glory. We kind of all laughed a bit like you laugh now. It seemed a great idea. And it kind of, the idea of doing something about the Bible story gradually, sort of settled amongst us. And we all came up with various different ideas. And some of them, I have to say, were sort of more general jokes, schoolboy jokes about the Bible story that seemed sort of, actually when we thought about, well, we've got to be cleverer than that. And we've got to be, if you're going to write about the Bible story, you've got to accept that, Jesus, people believe in Jesus, and Jesus has to be, we have to be clear that the film is not just about Jesus. Although we did have some very funny ideas that came up. There was the Last Supper sketch in which they go to the restaurant and they can't find a table. We can't do a table for 12, I'm afraid. We can do you 4 threes, or we can do a 6 at 9 o'clock. But you have to be out by 10:30. And, nice stuff, but it's rather depended on Jesus being present there. So in the end, we just came up with the idea of being able to do the Bible story through a false Messiah, of which there were many around at that time, historically. We did a lot of reading, actually, and we read our stuff, and indeed there were many false messiahs, so we could use Brian as a way to get into the story. And the story really, in the end, we felt quite deeply about this, that it's actually not about a personal faith or anything like that. It's about the people who assume the authority to dispense that faith, and how they get people to believe, and how people believe quite falsely in completely ridiculous things like the sandal up and all that sort of stuff. And that was the sort of motor of the film, really. And so it was a kind of sort of, I suppose you could say, it was an anti-authority film in a sense, not a film about Jesus or personal belief, but it gave us the chance to do some pretty funny stuff along the way. And I think it's the most successful thing we've done, actually.
I'm glad that even with those high aims of anti-authoritarianism, there's still room to get bigger stickers in. I think that's a relief.
Yes, I'm not saying they were clever. I'm not saying they were clever.
Oh, that wasn't a criticism, I promise.
No, yes, bigger stickers, yes. That was...
Now, I've got very sad news. We've only got time for one more question. There's more than one person at the mic, so I'd ask you to self-select. If your question's stupid, please move away from the mic now. I'm so sorry. I'm going to randomly have to throw it over here for the last question.
I was wanting to ask about your travel. How much is forward planned and how much is spontaneous? You mentioned the Chinese family before. Was that spontaneous or forward planned?
Well, we have to plan before you do the journey, really. You've got to plan roughly a route. And en route, there are certain things that you might film, like there's a carnival or there's a restaurant or whatever. There's something happening in that particular area which may produce a story. When I get to actually talk to the people there, that is spontaneous. I don't know quite what we're going to get out of a conversation. It just either it will work or it won't work. We do very little reshoots. We don't do second takes. We try and get it spontaneously each time. And so, you know, it's a mixture of planning to make it look unplanned, if you see what I mean. And that's kind of the intention, because when I do travel, I mean, what motivates me is my own experience of the world and the wonder of what I see. And that's best done by not knowing too much about what I'm getting into, so that on camera you get the reaction and you get the freshness, which is important.
Sounds like the perfect combination of the train spotter and the anarchic comedian. You helped me bring that all together. I'm so glad I asked you the question.
Yes.
Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in thanking Michael Palin.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Now,
thank you very much. Thanks. Thank you. Thank you.